During World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies. But after the war, the Communist Soviets and Democratic Americans had become enemies. Each side attempted to be the world's top superpower. The two nations sought to dominate in space, in military power, and in the allied countries they could lead. Their conflict is known as the Cold War.
Here at Illini Digital, we decided to create a game about this historical period because we found there are actually no really deep strategy games about the Cold War. We've never found something that really shows the actual conflict, the clashes and ideological struggles between the two superpowers at the time. So that's what we wanted to create. 1 year ago, we released our first game called The Cold War Era, and after a year of success in sales, we're happy to announce that we'll keep developing the franchise by working on the game's sequel. So, like we do within the game itself, let's take a look at the history and see what's happened so far.
Britain's Prime Minister Winston Churchill referred to the Iron Curtain that separated the free countries in the West from the communist countries in the East. President Harry Truman agreed that communism was a threat to the world. He proposed the Truman Doctrine, the policy of opposing the spread of communism.
In the original Cold War era game, players take control over one of the superpowers at the time, getting first-hand a very deep historical sense of the period, and ruling their chosen country through the hottest days of the Cold War, doing whatever you can to score higher than your rival. To make this happen, you need to pull as many countries into your sphere of influence as possible. Whichever country you choose, the Soviet Union or the US, you start in 1950 with the real historical alliances from that time. From there, you have two ways to draw other countries into your sphere of influence, either diplomatically or by military coup. With both methods, you need to have your spy network in the targeted country, shaking the country's stability by supporting anti-government demonstrations and increasing opposition to the present political regime. When the opposition in the target country is high enough, it's time for you to act.
Roosevelt and his CIA agents went round the bazaars of Tehran giving out dollars to get people out on the streets shouting pro-Shah slogans. In just 3 days, the CIA swung the crowds away from Mossadegh to the Shah. Mossadegh himself was arrested by the army and the Shah returned in triumph from Rome. This coup had been the CIA's safest kind of operation, political intervention. Roosevelt and a handful of CIA men changed the government by organizing revolution on the streets. 300 people died during the rioting, but the involvement of the CIA was kept secret. Tom Brayton was a director in the CIA's clandestine section.
What was the psychological effect on the agency of that operation?
Well, it was not the first foreign success in the Dirty Tricks Department, but it was certainly the first big one. And since it was a complicated, dangerous, difficult operation, and was performed so successfully with such little use of manpower and very little use of money.
If one of your allied countries is under threat of being overthrown, you can choose to increase your military presence in that country to try to counter the moves of your rival, who may want to use their military to fight against your interests, both there and elsewhere.
In Prague, Czechs gather to protest the invasion of their country by Russian forces. Troops are arriving from the Soviet Union, Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, and East Germany. In their desire to preserve their right to self-determination, citizens bravely confront the Soviets and their allies.
Back in Czechoslovakia, the leaders of the Prague Spring were arrested. Alexander Dubček himself was stripped of all his posts and power. He was stunned by what he regarded as a great betrayal. Only weeks before, he'd been meeting Soviet leaders in comradeship and harmony. President Brezhnev's Judas-like kiss seemed to sum up what power politics behind the Iron Curtain was all about.
Overthrowing governments diplomatically allows you to avoid the possibility of a long-time revolution or civil war in the targeted country. To make this possible, your influence must be very high, and there must also be a lot of opposition within the country to the present ruling regime. In this case, the local political elites will be able to change the government peacefully, based on the mood of the opposition. You can also increase your influence diplomatically by taking action through various options within the game menu, but the best way is to participate in the space race. The space race interface can help you increase your influence not just in one country, but internationally across the globe.
Достигший под руководством коммунистической партии величайшего прогресса, удалось, выведя на орбиту спутник, впервые проникнуть за пределы земной атмосферы. мир был поражен успехами советской науки и техники.
The Soviet space program became truly visible with the launching of the first Sputnik into low Earth orbit on October 4th, 1957. Small as it was, it created a sensation around the world and spurred the U.S. to accelerate its own program. Basking in the glow of its early success, the Soviet Union made it clear that the intent was to enhance its image as a technical, scientific, and military power.
Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Sideways shaking was unbelievable. The vibration was so intense you couldn't see the instrument panel. We have cleared the tower. I thought we'd had it during the launch.
1 minute after liftoff, the Saturn V is already supersonic.
Well, the Saturn V is still the most powerful machine that man has ever devised. 20 tons of fuel a second, 7.5 million pounds of thrust. I think we were all surprised at how strong that thing was.
2.5, picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. Yeah, I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful from here, Neil. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here.
If you feel that a country might leave your sphere of influence, or that a neutral country might fall under your rival's sphere of influence, you can always use the tension of the situation to launch a proxy war.
Army combat units also arrive, and the message of their presence on Vietnamese soil is plain. Whatever the present or future needs of the fight for freedom in Vietnam, they will be met. American forces in Vietnam know that the communists' so-called War of Liberation is no less a form of aggression than was the conventional attack in Korea. And they know that this new form of aggression must be defeated and proven unprofitable, or the communists will be encouraged to try it elsewhere with greater confidence and resources.
This, then, my fellow Americans, is why we're in Vietnam.
Damaged planes at Da Nang Air Base are one result of a long-range rocket shelling attack by Viet Cong, which also destroyed several military buildings. A powerful new Russian-made weapon is blamed. 200 homes in a village nearby were leveled as the VC used the heaviest and most powerful ground weapons of the war so far.
That the Viet Cong began the largest campaign of the war. The Americans, in fact, turned back the Tet Offensive. But for President Johnson, Tet was the turning point. He no longer believed he could win the war. In a few short months, he would succumb to pressures at home and abroad.
Kabul, Afghanistan, April 1978. A military coup brings a left-wing regime to power. In Washington, National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski was convinced the left-wing regime in Afghanistan was a major threat. Brzezinski's fears for the stability of the region gained weight when mass demonstrations in Tehran led to the overthrow of the Shah of Iran.
The day the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, I gave the president a memo in which the key sentence said, "We now have the opportunity to give the Soviet Union its Vietnam." And if I may add, we did.
The Islamic groups fighting the communists received covert American aid for the first time in July 1979. Nur Mohammad Taraki, Afghanistan's new leader, looked to the Soviet Union for support. Ranged against the Mujahideen was a mechanized, Soviet-trained Afghan army. Kabul pleaded with Moscow to send Soviet troops. In the Kremlin, Soviet leaders repeatedly met to discuss the Afghan crisis. After mobs massacred Soviet advisors and their families in Herat, Kabul's request for Soviet troops moved up the agenda.
In proxy wars, you can fight for or against a proxy country's government, depending on whether it's you or your opponent they support. In any case, when a proxy war starts, it can be very difficult and consume a lot of resources for you or your enemy to fight there. It all depends on how much you're ready to fight and provide your support. In these situations, as always, time is money.
The United States and the Soviet Union waged an arms race. Each country wanted to have more firepower than the other.
In the Arms Race sequel, a new and improved system of combat will be added to the game, bringing a whole new sensibility to the combat gameplay. All global conflicts will be very connected with the amount of military firepower you have at a given time. You will also have the opportunity to research the most famous military units of the Cold War, the same way as you explore the dynamics of the space race within the current game. You will be able to produce military units before you act in conflicts around the globe. If your military technology or quantity of military units is far behind your rivals, you may want to think twice before engaging in a proxy war. More advanced military units will provide you with better firepower, which can help you win a war with a lot less military spending.
Saturday the 6th of October 1973, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Israel's border troops, below strength during the holiday, came under surprise attack by Syrian and Egyptian forces 10 times greater than their own. In particular the Egyptians, who fought their way across the Suez Canal with spectacular success, and then engaged them in the biggest and bitterest tank battles since the Second World War. High-tech Soviet missile systems challenged the now established superiority of the Israeli Air Force, hindering their attempts to carry out ground support roles in the first hours of the war.
Another great addition in the Arms Race sequel will be the individual geographic settings for each country, known as geographical specifications. The more advanced your military is, the easier it will be for you to win because of your level of firepower. But your forces must also be tailored to the places that they fight in. For example, you will need a really strong navy to operate in the islands of the United Kingdom, and a strong air force will be key for fighting in Switzerland's mountains. Similarly, tanks will be superior arms to use in the plains of Central Europe. These are just a few of the new and improved game features, about which you can read more in the game description, that we're going to have available in the new game. Alina Digital is a small developer intent on making new games, but we need the support of our gamers to be able to continue. The Cold War era is a very specific kind of strategy game, working on an epic scale, so we hope the game will find its way to the hearts of strategy game players, and together we can create this great Cold War game. It's a type of game we'd love to see, and that's never been developed before. It's a lot like the space race. With just one small step in support, we can see a giant leap for the strategy games community. Thanks for watching, and with your support, we'll look forward to playing with you soon in this Cold War era Arms Race.